Welcome back to Buckeye Breakdown, where Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated continues to cover the Ohio State Buckeyes as they continue to prepare during 2021 fall training camp. Alongside Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. We are talking about a number of different topics today that have really come up within Ohio State football chatter, but most notably, we had a chance today to talk to the offensive lineman and offensive line coach, Greg Studrawa, and boy, there are some things going on with the offensive line that I don't think we were totally expecting. So we will certainly dive into that. We have a little bit of quarterback news to share and maybe a couple of other things to touch on as well. So, Brett, why don't we start with the offensive line where, boy, coming into the season, I mean, it certainly felt like with 3 returning starters and 2 of them being arguably the top 2 returning tackles in college football, that you could probably just take a Sharpie and scribble those in and, okay, no problem. Harry Miller probably going to be the center, maybe the left guard, and then we'll sort of see where things fit with Paris Johnson pretty likely being the right guard. And, you know, is it Matthew Jones? Is it Josh Fryer? Some different angles that could potentially be at left guard. But now an entirely different look today at camp. From left to right across the line, Nick Petit-Frere at left tackle. Thayer Munford moves into left guard. Harry Miller at center. Paris Johnson at right guard. And big man, Dejuan Jones. I guess they're all big, but 6'8", 370 is especially big. Boy, this is a little bit unexpected, and yet, I got to be honest, I kind of like it.
For sure. You're big across your front 5 when the smallest guy you have is 6'4" and like 315. We go 6'5", 6'6", 6'4", 6'6", 6'8", left to right. That's probably a good thing. That's like Wisconsin O-line territory there as far as like size. We're like that they're just absolutely massive. I think kind of the shuffling is a fascinating bit of kind of football decisions, right? And kind of knowing that you have not just a lot of talent within the starters, but there's a lot of guys behind them who can come in and fill in. I don't think Stud and Ryan Day and company do some of the reshuffling if they didn't feel confident in their depth. And I think that's something that I think we'll see a little bit of as the season kind of gets going and some games get going. But the O-line stuff is fascinating. I think moving, Petit-Frere to left tackle and then Thayer Munford sliding in at left guard. You could totally see them running behind that left side all season long, for sure. And then I'm fascinated too, when we were talking before we kind of kicked off the show, that how big they were. And the first thing that kind of popped into my head, and I know Stud joked about this during the media availability today, the first thing I thought of was like, well, good luck seeing over those dudes. And that might be their biggest problem at quarterback when it comes to, that QB O-line relationship. But they're huge. There's a ton of experience there. Petit-Frere's got to be, 4th-year junior, I'm pretty sure. Thayer Munford's, feels like he's been around since the mid-2000s. And maybe that's just because we covered him when he was in high school. And then Harry Miller's a junior. Paris Johnson Jr. is a sophomore, and Dejuan Jones is a junior. So there's some very real world, combat snaps, so to speak, for all those guys. And they're big, experienced, and it looks like very unselfish. And I think from a coaching standpoint, and certainly if you're an Ohio State fan, you probably are if you're watching this, that's maybe all you could ask for from an O-line perspective.
It's just, there's so much to unpack here. Why don't we start with Dejuan Jones? Because, he's kind of, to me, he's the obvious starting point. He is a behemoth of a young man. who Greg Studrawa today said he's the one that's kind of forced this decision. Thayer Munford went to Stud and said, hey, Dejuan looks pretty good. I'm willing to move to left guard if it means getting him in as we as a group try to find our best five. First of all, ridiculously unselfish from a guy who is easily one of, if not the best offensive tackle in the country in Thayer Munford. It speaks to Jones's work ethic. Coach Stud said today several times it's because he's kind of figuring out how to be a football player, and his athletic ability is growing because he played so much basketball when he was younger.
Yeah.
Now it's like he's turning the corner from almost the football perspective of this, and not just being a big guy that can occupy space. If you're 370, it's kind of hard to play guard. I guess it's possible, but that seems a little outrageous. But
there has to be a running lane. And if you take up like 1 1/2 running lane, if you take up a gap, that's an issue,
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, he's got to have, for him to play tackle, he's got to be able to have some, speed to his game where he won't get beat by a speed rusher on the outside. So, if the Buckeyes are considering him playing there, you'd like to think, well, that certainly has occurred to them. By all accounts, Paris Johnson is like, the second coming of Orlando Pace, and Josh Myers even pretty much said as much last year before we really even had a chance to see Paris, on the field consistently. So the Paris at right guard angle to this seems natural. But to me, it's the fact that Dejuan Jones has apparently gotten that much better, that one of the best tackles in the country is quote unquote unseating himself and willing to move to a different position to become more versatile and more flexible from his perspective, but also to get the right line out there. I just think this could be a really good thing if it works out for the Buckeyes.
I agree. And I do think of all the positions that you see, guys going from college to high school, I do think, as kind of the high school game gets a little bit more technical and the ability to study film on your own is easier. And we have some specialized coaching, and that becomes more available. I do think the biggest learning curve that you see, guys, is probably O-line, and a lot of it is kind of the subjectivity of technique. There's a handful of widely accepted fundamentals, but what you do offensively a lot of times dictates what you are taught in many ways as an O-lineman. For me, Dejuan is like, watching his like basketball highlight videos was one of the more impressive things I think I've seen from a football recruit in a good long time. Just the athletic, and our friends over there making the list of like the freaks in all of college sports. Like, he has to be on there for sure, right? So
yeah.
I really love that aspect of him, but I think from the developmental standpoint, where these guys are learning on such a steep curve because of the competition that exists at a tier 1 program like Ohio State, that in many ways, when you unseat kind of this like timetable that these coaches have kind of projected for you, like when you walk in day one, you're like, oh, like, we think this guy can play after X many months of kind of being in under the OSU coaching umbrella. When you kind of wreck that, especially as an O-lineman, that's really rare in my opinion. And so I think that's what makes his kind of almost crashing the party in some ways, probably the most dynamic thing and the most interesting thing about everything that we saw and are seeing so far with the first look at this team and its O-line. And I do think if you are going to play tackle, right tackle is probably best, because at some point you will eventually move over to left tackle. The older you get, that's usually how it works. And I do think also like that arm length that that you see as such a requirement now for tackles, to be able to force guys out wide when they try and beat you with speed. I think he has that in spades, for sure. But yeah, watching that first, like, going up against someone in a different color jersey, I think will be fascinating. And then you've got experience to his left, which is important, knowing that you can always have help there. And then at center, maybe one of the smarter guys we've ever seen come through the Ohio State football program, in Harry,
Isn't
and
he
a
the
lot of
best? I mean, he's just the best.
we could go into stoicism and Sisyphus and all types of Greek and Roman philosophy and later in the show if you want to. We can go there. But the fact that like you will sometimes see center help snap the ball and then come weak or strong side, that is also something that I think he can do. That maybe some guys at Ohio State we haven't maybe seen in a lot of ways since Billy Price back several years ago. So I think that's something that adds a little bit to this Dejuan Jones thing. But I think it's just sheer hard work and the fact that he's kind of broken the timetable or maybe the projections that the coaches have had for him.
Well, he made a comment today to the media that he was basically sick of waiting around. He felt like it's his time. He
Why
felt
not?
like he needed to put the work in. And, look, you can't coach size. So if that's your frame, and if he can play fast enough, you'd like to think he can play physical enough. In a lot of ways, that's a coach's dream. So I'm not surprised at all to see that he's made a nice stride forward. And playing next to Paris Johnson, could be huge for Paris. I like everything you've heard from coaches and Paris's teammates. It's almost like everyone is afraid to take that step and say that he really is that good because he hasn't had a chance to really show it yet. But his talent is not a secret within the room. Look, a lot of guys are really good high school football players, like legit elite high school players that never, blossom at the next level. And so you kind of want to get away from the crazy prognostications, but everybody is kind of looking around and saying, this guy's the real deal. And for him to slide in at right guard and be a first-year starter next to someone like Dejuan Jones, I think that to me discusses or highlights the confidence that the staff must have in Dejuan, because I think it would be easier to put Paris as a first-year starter next to a veteran offensive tackle. So I know maybe that was a roundabout way of getting there.
I agree.
It really, to me, it just underscores if this is something that they're looking at this point in camp, you're not doing things a week into camp and inside of 4 weeks to the regular season. You're not experimenting with that stuff unless you think, hey, this could be viable. Like, we're not just putting guys in different positions to see what it might look like. There is intent behind these decisions in practice. And I never really considered this group of 5 offensive linemen together in this rotation, but I could certainly see why the Buckeyes would really love it.
I agree. And I think you could, and I'm going to wildly speculate here for a second.
Oh boy.
But so
speculation.
Proverbial seatbelt on, please. I think in many ways, if you're looking at this on like the macro level, big picture, I think it might speak to a little bit of what you're going to see required from the quarterback and protections and assigning protections, in that if they feel like they can keep it as simple as humanly possible, they're going to then put guys out there that they know they can rely on for maybe one to 1.5-ish responsibilities, maybe even 2 at the very most. And so when you were talking about that just a second ago, that kind of triggered that thought in my mind that maybe what we're seeing at the output, as far as personnel is concerned at the O-line grouping right now is in a lot of ways also indicative of what they're requiring from the quarterback, whoever might win that job. And that might be a bit of a discussion point later in the show as well. So I'm curious to see if that's kind of how that shapes out a little bit protection wise, in that they're just going to try and keep it really, really simple. And knowing that they have a lot of experience on the left side, and that there's more, they can maybe essentially eliminate half the field, so to speak, and certainly half the gaps, and then keep everything on that right side super simple. But the fact that, like, I think coaches always will undersell in a lot of ways when it comes to kind of talking up individual players, and I think the best indication of the ceiling and that he has, that Paris Johnson has, is the fact that everybody across the board is kind of unwilling to be like, oh, this dude's like approaching like Orlando Pace territory, because that's such a huge statement if you think about that, both within the realm of college football. I would even go as far as to say like football in general, given what Orlando Pace did at the next level as well. So I think you try and manage that as best you can as coaches. But I mean, the fact that they're just putting in there in the first place, in my mind, speaks to not only his considerable ceiling and the levels at which he can reach, but also how high the floor is for him. And I think that speaks a lot to his ability level.
Well, everybody's pretty high on Paris, that's for sure. And we'll see if this is the line they actually start the season with on September 2nd. I think there's still, room to say, okay, maybe not quite the perfect mix. Josh Fryer and Matthew Jones have had good camps from what we've been told. Coach Stud today raved about Luke Whippler's work ethic, including literally 2 days after the national championship game. He was working out by himself in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and sending videos to Coach Stud saying, hey, I'm going to try to go out and win the starting center job next year. Even if the thought was that Harry Miller would become the guy. Coach Stud did today acknowledge that Harry right now is the leader in the clubhouse, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. He's likely to be the starting center, but Coach Stud loves what he's got in Luke Whippler. And obviously we really haven't even talked about Donovan Jackson, right, who is, a home run slam dunk type guy, where the Buckeyes maybe a few times in recent years haven't been able to get the super highly recruited offensive linemen across the country. Donovan Jackson kind of breaks that mold. And, I just don't know how he gets on the field super consistently this year unless there's an injury, which you certainly hope doesn't happen. Think about the comparison, right? If everybody feels the way they do about Paris Johnson, and he didn't play much last year, even for as good as Donovan Jackson is supposed to be, how does he get in the rotation quickly? So, again, we heard from all these guys today and impressed by a lot of them. I think my overwhelming feeling about the offensive line as a group, the last 2 years, they're extremely mature and well-spoken. And the Harry Miller super high level intellect, while it is uncommon, especially for a position as violent as something on the line in football, Nick Petit-Frere and Paris Johnson and Thayer Munford and Dejuan Jones are really well-spoken, thoughtful, giant teddy bears. And they're they're darn good football players. But I guess the point of pride here for Buckeye fans is knowing that, if you're rooting for these guys, you got 5 guys that, like, you can feel pretty good about who you're rooting for. Harry Miller, we referenced him earlier. I mean, look, the guy is he's operating at a different level than most football players do, let alone offensive linemen.
A wide array of interests.
Oh,
so
man,
speak,
it's crazy.
Not just football
poetry left and right, and talking about super, super philosophical stuff. His favorite book is Moby Dick, and Three Musketeers, and some like old literature that most of us through high school lit classes were kind of head bobbing, trying to stay awake through. And he's like memorizing lines, and it's his MO. So anyway,
shout out to the fact that for the first time maybe in Ohio State football history, we're getting to talk about Alexander Dumas and Ohio State football all in the same conversation. So being able to reference Three Musketeers and Buckeyes football, thanks, and only literally in sole possession or ownership of this is to Harry Miller.
Yeah,
for sure. The voraciousness of his intellect, I think, it actually speaks to, in large part, the development, the steep curve of development that is a baseline expectation at Ohio State. And I think he speaks to it better than maybe some guys we've had in the past, just simply because I think, he is able to, espouse and personify that differently and more specifically than maybe some dudes we've had. But like, I think in many ways, the other thing that I think hits kind of the nail on the head of what you were speaking of just a few minutes ago, which the guys you are rooting for and wanting these dudes to succeed. The fact that you have and I think it's safe to project that this is the starting 5. Okay, I think that's safe to say, at least as we know, given all the information that we have at the moment. We'll say that this is the first group, maybe not starting 5. In this first group, you've got 5 pretty dynamically different personalities there. And the fact that there is a level of cohesiveness that the coaches trust, despite those 5 different personalities, it bodes well for this football team going forward this season.
Well, and Nick talked about that specifically, just the rotation today of who was speaking where and at what podium. Nick Petit-Frere came in right after Harry Miller left. And so Harry's done at the end of it. And everybody in the media is kind of looking at each other left and right. And, we're kind of laughing because it's a little bit insane that we just talked to a football player who, is this larger than life figure that has an incredibly thoughtful, soft spirit. It's just abnormal. It's refreshing, but it's abnormal. And I think even Harry realizes that, but he embraces it. So as soon as Nick comes in, I asked him right away, hey, first of all, you're going to quote Moby Dick for us. He kind of laughed. And I said, seriously, though, what's it like to have a guy like Harry in your position group, in your locker room where, it's just not prototypical? And Nick was pretty quick to say, we've got a lot of different personalities in our room, and we've all just tried to embrace each other and learn from each other. And boy, isn't that kind of a nice message in a world we live in where, it feels like you're trying to be shoved into a mold, and everybody is, maybe somewhat hesitant to embrace something that feels different. This is a room with a lot of personality, but a lot of differences, and yet the cohesion certainly is there.
Yeah, and I think that is unique to all of football in that O-line especially is maybe the only position group that you have where that's actually like a good thing for the most part. I think you want your wide receivers to be of a similar personality or a single mindset. Quarterbacks, 100%. Linebackers, sure. Secondary, sure. But if your O-line is a little bit varied, I think that's a good thing. I kind of wonder too, like who's kind of the leader of that group. And who
it's got to be Thayer, isn't it?
I would agree, and I think in large part it is due to his one maturity level, which is amazing, and in a pretty dynamic development in and of itself over the last 5-6 years. But two, I think it's the unselfishness that you've seen over the last couple seasons with guys, that have graduated and moved on as well. So I really like that, as far as both developing talent, but also then proven results on the field. I think it checks both of those boxes. We also talk a lot about, rave about it. In some ways, we have so many superlatives that we kind of run out of them. For Larry Johnson and his development of the defensive lineman, I don't know if we talk about Coach Stud enough, as far as doing that for as long as Coach Johnson has at times. So I think it's a testament to him and the fact that you have all these personalities and you're still able to make it work. That's
because they're offensive linemen, man. We've been talking about the offensive line for 25 minutes. I don't think people spend more than a few minutes at a time, but you're exactly right. Stud has been a staple as to why this Ohio State run has continued now for a while, and why
and he's doing that without pulling in 5-star dudes every single year. I mean, is there a better bit of evidence as to your job, the proficiency at which you do your job, when you have guys that maybe aren't that highly rated, and you come in and you start churning out first rounders?
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
I'm totally with you. It's cool that it's a group that might get overlooked a little bit outside of, the super diehard fan. But man, football is a game that's won in the trenches. And if you don't have a good foundation at the line of scrimmage, you got nothing. I don't know the exact number, but over the last several years, you can probably count far more games than not where Ohio State's offense has averaged 6, 7, 8 yards per play throughout the entirety of a game. They're not losing games over this stretch of now 20 years of incredibly good football. They're not losing games because the offense can't figure out a way to move the ball. And it starts with having an offensive line that can block for really good running backs. You think about some of the greatest running backs in the history of Ohio State, unless they were way, way back when the game was played a different way. So many of those guys have played within the last 20 years. Well, running backs tend to put up really good numbers when they're running behind guys that can block for them. Yep. You frequently have to go back and point to the offensive line as a big reason for success. I don't think too many people want to sit here and listen to a half-hour podcast on the offensive line. So why don't we talk about quarterbacks? I think that's probably fair. I guess we can call it news. Feel like we're grasping at straws a little bit because of this top secret nature around, the quarterback competition and the extremely brief window that media members are allowed to watch a couple of practices throughout the course of the fall. And all of the coaches and all of the players all say the right things about the quarterback competition. So our ability to truly glean who is ahead and who's not, it's not fair to base it just on practice from a 15-minute window that we see. But when it's all we have to talk about it, at least in some regard, right? So it appears that Kyle McCord has jumped ahead of Jack Miller because in line in terms of the reps that these guys are taking, CJ Stroud is still taking reps first, then it's Kyle, then it's Jack, and then the rest. It was previously CJ, Jack, then Kyle. Do we read into that? I don't know if it's of great attention, but I think it's something. I don't think it's nothing. And I will tell you this, after being at practice this morning, got a chance to at least watch a few quarterback drills. And I just love Kyle's arm. Standing at midfield, watching these guys throw 50 to 60-yard passes toward the back corner of the end zone to hit receivers, especially throwing it into the wind. Kyle just had a little more punch on his ball. And CJ certainly has a good arm. I think Kyle's got a little tighter spiral. It's not to say that any of these guys are perfect and don't miss a throw every once in a while, but I think that can't be the only deciding factor in this race. But I really like Kyle McCord's arm. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's a phrase that that has kind of become, zeitgeist a little bit over the last 10, 15 years with the kind of the uptick and increased interest in both recruiting, but also the NFL draft. The phrase is arm talent.
Sure.
And I think when guys put that on display, in which there is a very obvious kind of zippiness to it, it's esoteric in a lot of ways that you kind of know it when you see it. And I think across the board of everything that we saw with the quarterbacks, that was kind of the one thing that I felt like I gleaned from, going across the entire landscape of Ohio State football media, was that everyone kind of thought that. And I think you have some really cultured eyes, some really, experienced guys and women looking at that. So I think this is also what happens when you only get to see 15 minutes of practice and you have no actual tangible kind of peek into what that quarterback battle looks like outside of that. And so, I wonder a little bit as to, if that's a true indication of depth chart. But I also think that, I think one thing maybe above all else, when it comes to camps, especially, coaches love routines, and you don't mix up, kind of the rep order in practice. You don't mix up a lot of, a lot of the kind of times and all of that for scheduled events and stuff, because you want these guys kind of drilled down into a almost military-like precision. And so I don't think it's outrageous to watch one guy go from 3 to 2 and think, yeah, you know what, you're moving up in the depth chart. And then on top of that, you see that arm talent on display. It is maybe evidence as to why he's kind of moved up on the rep totem pole.
Here are the other components of this. We don't have the ability to get inside the locker room and see how these guys are interacting with each other behind closed doors. We don't know what it's like in the weight room or in the training room or when they live together or when they're social with each other. And so much of this becomes, that trust you build with one another, the chemistry you build. I mean, you don't have to like each other, but you got to be able to trust each other. There's a huge difference there. I think anybody who's ever been a part of a team has probably had teammates before that they weren't necessarily friends with, but that's life. And you got to figure out how to work with people.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when you're playing on a football team. You may not like everybody you're with, but you got to figure out how to make sure that, you're getting the best out of each other and pulling the rope in the same direction. That's the whole point. So there's that component of it. And then beyond that, you're not in this room, in the quarterback room at Ohio State, unless you have the talent to be the guy. There's no way you're there as a scholarship athlete unless you are capable of being the guy. So picking a starting quarterback is so much, to me, it is so much more about who has the trust, who won't crack when, the game gets really fast, who still plays it as though it's slow. Who can Ryan Day and his staff walk into a game in a stadium with 100,000 people in it, maybe on the road, where you're going to get everybody's best shot and you're going to get exotic blitzes flying left and right, and who's not going to turn the ball over? That's the kind of stuff that I think can be challenging to simulate in practice, but that's literally what Ryan Day and his staff have to do right now, because whether it's CJ or Kyle or Jack or any of the other guys on the roster, there's a pretty good chance the Buckeyes are going to win a bunch of games with whomever their quarterback is. The difference between being good and being a national championship contender is having a quarterback that can play at an elite level. Does CJ have it? Does Kyle have it? Does Jack have it? That's what they need to figure out. And so I'm looking at this saying, if CJ's still the number one guy right now, and Kyle has made a jump from 3 to 2, that perhaps that is some level of reading into what the coaches are feeling about those personalities. But by the same token, Brett, I don't think they need to rush to name a starting quarterback. And maybe it's better for whoever that starter is in the long term if they don't name somebody sooner than later, because it keeps those guys grinding. I mean, this is such a complicated process.
I agree with all of that. And I also think that in a lot of ways, what you just described, I think, is almost coaching philosophy, right? In that, how do you essentially identifying the process and the steps that you take to develop guys to the level at which you then feel comfortable playing them, right? And I think it differs. It's as subjective in a lot of ways as anything else in football. And I do wonder if, like, how much competition is good competition. One, but two, it requires an emotional intelligence from the coaches to understand that if you have, whoever these quarterbacks might be, so like it doesn't necessarily even have to be specifically the Ohio State guys, but whatever the personalities that you have in that quarterback room, if you have really confident guys, if you have guys that are a little bit insecure, all of that, if you're able to then get an accurate assessment of that and then tailor what you do to them from a practice standpoint, film standpoint, essentially giving them all of the information or not all of it, and then seeing what they do with that and then picking a guy from there. I think that's entirely just a 100% subjective feel game from coaches. And to me, if you're looking at based on the evidence on the field over the last 5 years, I don't think anybody's done that in the country better than Ryan Day, in that you've seen now a couple different guys go into that room. And I'm talking specifically about 3 dudes. That's Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, and Joe Burrow. You've seen 3 guys with 3 very different personalities go out and perform across the board over the course of like 6-7 years. That, I think, speaks to the process and how, similar or different that process might be depending on the guys you actually have in the room. And when it comes to this group, I kind of wonder a little bit about the competition, because in many ways they've been competing since they've been in the building for that like 2, 3, 4 spots. And I think at some point some guys might get tired of that. They obviously feel comfortable in that they will not tire of that. And I think that is a good thing. And so the depth chart to me, and maybe the switching of the guys at 2 and 3 speaks to the fluidity of the situation. And I do think that the idea of keeping these guys grinding, as long as they know that you are comfortable with them in that position, that's elite level football. That's elite, expecting elite performance from your players as a coach. And so, and to then look at the evidence on the field that we've seen over the last couple of seasons, you can't say that anything's been wrong or it's been a problem. The evidence is playing out perfectly in a lot of ways.
The only other coach that I think you could maybe make a comparison to, just with the way he's handled quarterbacks, is Lincoln Riley. Obviously, Oklahoma's had a hell of a run here with a few quarterbacks. But I agree. I mean, you know, the
different defensive philosophy in that conference, which I think helps. But I agree.
Well, and his three quarterbacks are probably a little more similar to each other than what we've seen. I mean, Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields have extremely different skill sets. Not that Dwayne can't run, but he's a pro pocket passer.
For sure.
So, anyways, I guess the way I would summarize where I feel right now about the quarterback spot is that whomever wins that job, maybe Ryan Day knows in his gut who he wants, and he just isn't willing to make that commitment yet because he wants to keep pressuring whomever that is. Or maybe he truly doesn't know yet. Whatever the case is, whoever the guy is that wins this job probably shouldn't feel like once they won it that it's theirs. I almost feel like the winner has to work that much harder to keep it. And whomever isn't named the starting quarterback week one, sure as heck can't be far off from being named the starting quarterback week one. And the Buckeyes need to find a way to win games. It's as simple as that. If you win, you're giving yourself a chance to win repeatedly. You got a chance to play pretty regularly.
Wait, here, let me frame the question that I think is maybe most interesting when it comes to this conversation. When do you decide on a starter? I think I essentially, like, when do you have an internal deadline? And in a lot of ways, I kind of think it's like the 2-week mark out from your first game, 2.5 weeks, maybe. So in theory, today being Tuesday the 10th, when we're taping and recording this, I could make the argument by the end of this week into the front part of next week, Ryan Day will probably have settled on a guy, I would think.
Yeah, I mean,
it's been different. It's been different by regime, so to speak.
No, I mean, he alluded to that. I mean, even at Big Ten Media Day, that he'd like to know within the first couple of weeks of camp the direction he's going to go. And then as he was asked yesterday, as we shoot this on Monday the 9th, when he visited with the media, when he was asked sort of the process and how it's going, he's not going to name a starter or tell you who's leading the race until he's ready to tell you that. But, he pulled back the curtain a little bit in terms of the process, which I thought was cool. He did allude to the fact that, maybe even at the end of next week, that, maybe a little bit longer than he originally thought. And that kind of goes back to my original feeling of what's the rush? If it really is that close of a race, somewhere along the way, you got to make a decision, right? And it would help your team to know, hey, we got a couple weeks at the back half of camp, or roughly half of what we're going into battle with week one. I think that's good for team mentality. You don't want to be starting game prep week when nobody really knows who your starting quarterback is. That's not healthy. But, if it takes an extra couple days, so what? Just, there's maybe it goes without saying, man. He's the head coach at Ohio State. He's widely considered the best quarterbacks coach in the country right now. There's a lot of pressure to get this right.
Yeah.
The first 2 years that he's led this program have been outstanding. I mean, you can use whatever superlative you want. The Buckeyes felt like they should have beaten Clemson in 2019 and got hosed. And that was a single motivating factor all off season last year. And then they made it to the national championship game under the most difficult circumstances imaginable in our sport, and didn't play well because they were pretty shorthanded. This is a huge decision because you don't know who the quarterback's going to be, where 2 years ago, when it was, apparent that Justin was coming to Ohio State, he was pretty much the guy. So there's a lot riding on this. You got to get it right.
These two things I know are true, to go back to the Max Kellerman around the horn days. Ohio State got totally hosed against Clemson. I think if you're watching this program, you're nodding vehemently and then trying not to remember that game. And then two, I think above all else, you feel extremely comfortable with Ryan Day's ability to develop quarterbacks, and you're exceptionally comfortable with his ability to recruit the quarterbacks. Because right now, above all else, what we're talking about essentially boils down to the fact that Ohio State has a ton of depth at the most important position in all of football, and that's huge.
There's no other school in the country right now, and like that's not hyperbole. There's no other school in the country that is going through this process that has the options that the Buckeyes have.
For sure.
There's a lot of reasons to think that they can't make the wrong decision. But to me, that's different than saying we made the right decision. And whatever decision you make, you have to make with conviction. And I think one of the things I most admire about Ryan Day, to circle back to the point I made earlier, he's really good about being super intense when he needs to be, but really calm when the waters are choppy and the game is going fast. He has a way of bringing down the temperature in a crazy environment, and that is critical for a young quarterback to succeed on a huge stage. So, yeah, I trust him to make the right decision. Whether it's CJ or Kyle or Jack yet, we don't know. I don't know if I'm ready to vote one way or the other. I like things about all three of them, but the thing I like most about any of the three of them is Kyle's arm. I really, really like his arm talent. And by the way, Quinn Ewers isn't even on campus yet. So that'll add a whole nother layer to this, because Quinn's not going to be the starter on September 2nd. If it is, I will gladly say that I messed that one up, but he's
got a lot of name and likeness deals to sign between now and when he gets on campus. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, it ain't gonna happen.
You do you, homie.
But maybe he could get into a game somewhere along the way this year, and it's got to be Quinn's perspective that he's coming to Columbus this year to essentially try to develop that camaraderie and build that chemistry with teammates in whatever reps he gets, in hopes that he can win the job next year. So, yeah,
you just stumbled into an unintended tangent about college football at large, and a trend that I actually think we're going to see a trend that I think we're going to see a whole lot more, exceptionally so, over the next couple of years, which is guys who are tier 1, 5-star, locks to be draft picks, so to speak, essentially skipping a final year of high school so that they can go and make money a little bit easier. It's name and likeness. The fact that, like, if you're 18, you don't necessarily need to prove anything more as far as football tape is concerned, recruiting wise. Everybody's trying to get you to, to sign on and do whatever. And if you can go sign for a $50,000 whatever, you're going to go to high school.
No way.
People are going to graduate early. It's going to happen a ton. It's going to happen a ton.
That part of it, in principle, I totally agree with. But I wonder how many guys are going to be able to graduate high school early. I
think you're going to see guys try and go into like curriculum tracks to be able to be in position to do that.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if I agree with that philosophically.
Sure.
I think on a like #life kind of standpoint, maybe you shouldn't do that. But I also think everyone's different and it's subjective. But it's going to be a trend that he's the first one that we're going to see, and I think it's going to be something that we see several times a year for the next little while.
I absolutely agree. He is the first, and that there will be others that follow. I'm very curious to see if this becomes something that is, as common as early enrolling has become over these last 7 to 10 years now. I think there are a lot of schools, especially some of the private schools across the country, that produce a lot of this top-end talent. I wonder how many of those schools are going to have, educational tracks in place where kids could theoretically skip an entire year. I think some of that would have to be developed. And I just wonder how fast that could move. But I totally agree with you. If someone offered me the kind of money that Quinn Ewers is being offered, and the choice is go make that and get an equity stake in a company that you know and believe in, or go play high school football for one more year, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? So I don't blame him for that at all.
There, in the last maybe couple years, there's a handful of guys that I think would have probably done that. And hindsight being what it is now, the guy at the top of my list that probably would have done that, and I think this is totally a hindsight play, is Tate Martel. And as we've seen through the progression of his college football career, which I think he's on his third school now, moving to UNLV, not great. I think there's some development there, and so it's entirely subjective. I think we wander into, unintentionally, but we wander into kind of the accidental, unintentional consequences of name and likeness, both good and bad, and we're all along for the crazy ride that will entail. This is just one of them.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to follow because that's obviously a hot storyline now all across the country, and now that it's happened, the question marks around wondering if it could happen are, suddenly a thing of the past. So
the cars at the practice facilities and D1 college football programs across the country have always been good. The level of them is going to go up a little bit. So when you drive by wherever you might be, the cars are going to be worth looking for. They always have been, but it's going to be especially true now.
We're looking at you, Jack Sawyer.
Big tires, big rig, baby.
Yeah. If you didn't see that on social media, Jack Sawyer is apparently now repped by Wahlberg Chevy, which, by the way, for those who don't know, Mark Wahlberg is now in the car dealership game. Interesting flex, but I guess it's working. I know he's got one on the west side of Cleveland. I know he's got at least one in Columbus. And jumping on
right down the road for me in Cleveland.
Yeah. And jumping on with a recruit as popular as Jack Sawyer is a great place for Mark Wahlberg Chevy to start. So good for him and great for Jack for sure. All right. Why don't we put a bow on it for today from there? We talked a lot about the offense, and I'm certain that we will talk more defense as the week goes along. If memory serves me correct, I believe on Thursday we're going to hear from Al Washington and the linebackers. That is a huge point of emphasis for the Buckeyes this year in camp because it's a fresh group. Pete Warner's gone, Tuff Borland's gone, Justin Hilliard, Baron Browning, they're all gone. And so guys that have not gotten a ton of playing time are going to suddenly find themselves in some pretty meaningful spots. Taraja Mitchell, Cody Simon, Dallas Gant, maybe Tommy Eichenberg. There's lots of different areas we can explore here. But I think the Buckeyes like what they have. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Coach Washington and some of those guys have to say on Thursday.
And if you're playing Buckeyes Now bingo, you can go ahead and put your chip on the St. Ignatius reference for the show. We've done it, folks. Good night.
There it is. You got to drop those in there. Got to drop them in. So anyways, we'll chat with you.
B-I-N-G-O, baby.
Yeah, that's right. We'll chat with you on Thursday about the linebackers and touching some more on the defensive side of the ball. As always, BuckeyesNow.com is your place for all the latest news and info related to the Buckeyes. Check us out on social media. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We like to put a lot of this content out there and would love to know that you like it. Please leave some comments. And if you don't like it, tell us why and what you do differently. And hopefully we can make this a place that you want to spend some time as you follow all your favorite Ohio State coverage. We're also on any of your favorite podcast outlets. You can find Buckeye Breakdown there as well. For Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you real soon as the Buckeyes continue their 2021 training camp and they get ready for Minnesota here in a couple of weeks. See you soon.